Hello, I'm Dr. James Rovira with Mississippi College. I'm here as a host of a Romantic Circles Reviews and Receptions book chat. We are here to honor the life and work of Diane Hovler today. She was professor of English at Marquette University. She studied 18th and 19th century literature. She was primarily interested in the Gothic and feminism. She wrote quite a bit about the female Gothic. Her, most recent project is very interesting. It's on the Marquette University website, the Gothic Archive chapbooks. There's about 30 Gothic chapbooks up. Some of them are scanned, some of them are transcribed. And that was tied to her work on her, I think her most recent book is The Gothic Ideology. Is that right? And
yes, that's right.
Coming out soon, but that's her most recent as of now. Mm-hmm. So I am joined by, hold on a second, Dr. Beth Lau. She is professor of English Emerita at Cal State Long Beach. Her books include Keats's Reading of the Romantic Poets and Keats's Paradise Lost, as well as the edited collections Fellow Romantics, Male and Female British Writers, 1790 to 1835, which came out in 2009, and the forthcoming Jane Austen and Sciences of the Mind. With Diane Hovler, she co-edited Approaches to Teaching Bronte's Jane Eyre in 1993, and she contributed essays to A Companion to the Brontes, 2016, and Time, Space, and Place in Charlotte Brontë, both co-edited by Diane Hovler and Deborah Morse. Angela Wright will also be joining us. She's professor of Romantic Literature at the University of Sheffield and currently co-president of the International Gothic Association. She is the author of Gothic Fiction, Palgrave 2007, Britain, France, and the Gothic, The Import of Terror, Cambridge University Press, 2013, and it came out in paperback in 2015, and co-editor with Dale Townshend of Anne Radcliffe, Romanticism and the Gothic, also Cambridge in 2014, and Romantic Gothic and Edinburgh Companion, 2015. Her research is connected with and benefited from the expertise of Diane Long Hovler in many ways. Diane participated in one of Angela's two panels upon women's Gothic at the Chawton House, International Conference upon Women's Writing in 2013. And in turn, Angela participated in Diane's specially convened panel upon Anne Radcliffe at the Nassar Conference in Washington, D.C. in 2014. They met frequently at conferences upon Romanticism and the Gothic, and Diane contributed an essay to the collection Anne Radcliffe, Romanticism and the Gothic, that Angela published with Dale Townshend in 2014, and a co-authored essay upon Gothic chapbooks, which references the archive I just mentioned, with Douglas H. Thompson, to Romantic Gothic and Edinburgh Companion. Angela will speak about Diane's influential studies upon the forms of Gothic in the Romantic period. Now, Deborah Morse is another contributor. She's not going to be present today because she's feeling very ill. She's coughing quite a bit, I'm afraid. But she has contributed a paper, and I will be reading her paper last. Deborah Morse is the Vera W. Barkley Term Professor of English at the College of William and Mary. She is the author of Women in Trollope's Palliser novels and Reforming Trollope, Race, Gender, and Englishness in the Novels of Anthony Trollope, and co-editor of the Routledge Companion to Anthony Trollope, in addition to 5 volumes in Victorian Studies. Deborah's work with Diane Long Hovler includes The Blackwell Companion to the Brontes and Charlotte Brontë, Time, Space, and Place. July 2016, Routledge. Deborah has lectured internationally on Trollope. Her lectures on the Brontes include presentations at Smith College, at the CUNY Grad Center, the latter on the current state of Brontë scholarship. She is lead editor of the recently published Victorian's Journal of Literature and Culture Bicentenary Charlotte Brontë issue, and is an invited contributor to the Victorian Review and Literature Compass Bicentenary issues on Charlotte as well. Deborah will be a keynote speaker on Emily Brontë for Transatlantic Emily Bicentenary Conference held in Harlexton, Lincolnshire in the summer of 2018, which sounds very interesting. She has published many essays on all three Brontë sisters and is completing a book project tentatively entitled Brontë Violations. So that's the order in which we're going to speak as well. Beth will go first, and Angela, and then I'll read Deborah's paper. And we're going to have little brief interludes between each paper and then at the end for questions or discussions. So if Beth would like to get started, let's hear her talk about Diane.
Okay, very good. I met Diane in the fall of 1987 when she and I were both in the early stages of our careers. She had organized a small conference at Marquette in conjunction with the traveling Wordsworth exhibit, and I was teaching at Ripon College in Wisconsin. Diane was in her first year at Marquette, and it is typical of her subsequent behavior that she took on the time-consuming job of organizing a conference at this early point in her job. I remember her telling me that it was like organizing a wedding. So involved and time-consuming it was. It was also typical of Diane that on either our first or our second meeting, I don't remember which, but it was early, she invited me to collaborate with her on the approaches to teaching Brontë's Jane Eyre volume, about which she had made initial inquiries at MLA. Both of these actions speak to Diane's collegiality, her eagerness to be actively involved in the profession in various fields, including Romantic, Victorian, Gothic, and women's literature, and her incredible energy. Like many women, Diane had to balance work, marriage, and children. She received her PhD from University of Illinois in 1976, and until she was hired at Marquette in 87, she filled a number of positions, most in the Milwaukee area, where her husband David was a history professor at UW-Milwaukee and where she lived with her two young children, John and Emily. From 1980 to 1987, Diane was a high school English teacher, and her job at Marquette was initially defined as an English education position. Diane was ambitious to be recognized as a literature scholar, however, and many senior people in her department resisted her efforts and sought to keep her restricted to and defined as an English ed person. For many years, she fought a battle to be recognized in her department as an equal to other major literature faculty, and she eventually triumphed. She published so many well-regarded books and articles, received so many accolades as a teacher, served on so many committees and administrative positions in her university, won so many grants and awards, engaged in so many professional activities, that at last her colleagues had to acknowledge her prominence as a major figure in Romantic, Gothic, and women's literature. Diane was a fighter. Putting obstacles in her way made her strive all the harder to overcome them. She was incredibly hardworking and also efficient. She seemingly did not know the meaning of procrastination or writer's block, but attacked each project head-on and completed every stage with dispatch. I'm not sure she ever turned down a request to work on a project, whether as author, editor, reviewer, organizer, administrator, teacher, or mentor. When I last talked to her on the phone, less than 3 months before she died, she told me with regret that she had to turn down an invitation to submit an essay for a volume. I think it was a Cambridge Companion to Dracula. Clearly it bothered her and went against the grain to have to say no to this writing assignment. As it was, she continued working on the 2 Brontë collections she was co-editing with Deborah Morse up until the last possible moment. She wrote to me about the page proofs of my essay for one of the collections in April, a little more than a month before she died in May. Diane enjoyed collaborating with colleagues, as is evident from the fact that she co-authored or co-edited 12 books. I was one of the first of her co-editors on the approaches to teaching Brontë's Jane Eyre volume. Here it is.
Very good.
Published by MLA in 1993. As I recall, Diane handled most of the communications with contributors and the press and wrote one essay in the introduction for the volume, and I wrote the bibliographical essay and had primary responsibility for reviewing and editing submitted essays. As always, Diane performed all of her duties efficiently and capably and met each deadline. Her own piece, entitled Jane Eyre Through the Body, Food, Sex, and Discipline, describes how she teaches imagery of food and starvation, sexuality, and other bodily desires in the novel, drawing on the work of Foucault, Freud, Norbert Elias, and Mikhail Bakhtin. She considers how the dynamics of class and gender in the 18th and 19th centuries informed depictions of the body in Jane Eyre, and argues that at the novel's conclusion, the heroine possesses the perfectly disciplined bourgeois body. The essay makes a number of sharp observations about patterns in the novel, drawing on then current critical theories, and is written in a lively, often witty style. While Diane and I were working on the Approaches to Jane Eyre volume, she was also finishing her first book, Romantic Androgyny, and frequently discussed her progress with me. The manuscript was accepted for publication by Penn State Press, though a number of revisions were requested. I remember Diane telling me how she spent a summer working long hours to complete all the revisions before the fall semester began. It was a hot Midwestern summer, and her study on the third floor of her Victorian house was extremely warm, but she said she sat at the computer all day in her underwear with several fans blowing on her and powered through until she finished the book. I thought that was a typical anecdote of Diane's methods. Romantic Androgyny was published in 1990 and was one of the first books to analyze depictions of women in the works of the major male Romantic poets. The book evolved from her dissertation on androgyny in the poetry of Blake and Percy Shelley, but it was substantially revised and expanded to include the other big six male poets and incorporate cutting-edge French and Anglo-American feminist criticism. In separate chapters, it explores images of the mother, sister, beloved, femme fatale, and muse in male Romantic poetry, and argues that all of these figures represented absorption and appropriation of women into the male psyche. The book was one of the pioneering works of feminist criticism in the field of Romanticism and helped launch this major critical approach. Diane and I stayed in touch over the years. She was a steady friend and always arranged to get together when we were both attending conferences. In 2000, we both edited novels for Alan Richardson's new Riverside series, she Wuthering Heights and me Sense and Sensibility, and we compared notes on these projects. She invited me to contribute an essay for the prose volume of the 2012 Blackwell Encyclopedia of British Romantic Literature, a massive undertaking she co-edited with Fred Berwick and Nancy Gosley. And even though I ended up writing on John Keats for the poetry volume Nancy Gosley has edited, I very much appreciated Diane's kind invitation. She kept me on her list of worthy contributors and once again invited me to write essays for the two Brontë volumes, one for Ashgate and one for Blackwell Press, that ended up being her final publications. In the course of preparing for this discussion, I realized how important a presence Diane has been for me throughout my career. She was always open to sharing professional and personal experiences, and she directly aided me numerous times by including me in her projects. Her substantial body of written work and her example of tireless, extensive contributions to our field will continue to inspire me and many others. She will be missed.
Thank you. So any comments right now, Angela?
I think that one thing that strikes me as similar in what I'm about to say to Beth's commentary there is, how incredibly supportive she was, and constantly at conferences talking about her projects, but also taking a genuine interest in the career of others, and that's something that really strikes a chord with me. She was very selfless in that way.
Right.
amazing how professional and dedicated she remained. You know, in 2015 as well. You know, it was absolutely amazing the strength which she maintained as she became progressively ill.
Right. She never stopped. She never flagged.
No, she didn't. No, no. And I'm going to speak a little bit about her attendance at conferences when
Right.
you know, she was already feeling unwell, and the fact that she still made it and travelled incredible distances to go to places to participate and do her duty as a scholar.
Right.
Right.
Well, I appreciate that. For me, a romantic androgyny was my first introduction to her work. I was, and I was working on a essay for a book chapter on superheroes, and I was going to write about Guardians of the Galaxy. And I noticed that the male characters seemed to have traditionally feminine characteristics, and the main female character had traditionally masculine characteristics. There's a scene where they both have to get things, and he's trying to talk the person out of it, and she's beating everyone up. And I realized that, you know, the film is consistently crossing gender lines like that. So I wanted to approach it from the standpoint of androgyny. And I wanted to use Blake as a starting point, too, so that led me straight to her book. And I really like how she used Plato's Symposium. It was a great reminder of that text. And what was striking to me was about the symposium was it kind of normalized same-sex desire. At least one of the speakers did. Mm-hmm. That was incredible. I mean, I don't think that occurred again until much later in history, you know, maybe the 19th or 20th century. But, you know, if you have these original humans who are two males or two females or a male and a female joined together and then they were split, their soulmates would naturally be either same sex or opposite sex, but that would be natural. It was naturalized. So, you know, her work reminded me that there have always been different ways of thinking about gender and sexuality. So, and it gave me some good tools to discuss the film with, you know. And I did use Blake in that essay too. Now, it's been a couple of years actually. I don't even remember exactly what I said. But it's moving through the works now, and I think it should be coming out in a few months. So, would you like to go, Angela, now?
Yes, I think that one of the things that characterises her work for me in relation to romantic androgyny is the incredible facility with which she moves between poetry, prose and drama. She's very able generically to actually comment on all different forms and their relationships. So you know, that work is a very important work because she was looking at androgyny within the work of, you know, poetry during the Romantic period, predominantly by males. And I think that we see a turn, you know, in some ways that's reflected in the work of feminism, where she then moves in Gothic feminism towards working upon women authors, where she looks at, you know, how women are portrayed in the Gothic and in Gothic poetry, but also, you know, how women portray other women. And it's kind of interesting, that movement in her career, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking over her work. It's like you could pretty easily write a narrative of her work, like it follows a continual arc from romantic androgyny to now.
Right.
Like it's one step leads to the next.
Yes.
You know, I'm not able to write that narrative, but it seems like I could with a little more time.
Yeah.
You know, instead of scholars who just, you know, enter a bunch of different fields.
Yeah.
Well, we've been starting with the male poets' depictions of women and then focusing more and more on women writers.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And then the works in the middle that I'll discuss in a little bit of depth, you know, the Gothic ideology and Gothic riff. They're both works which look at you know, works by males and females, and they have a different emphasis in some ways. And they're looking to a European tradition, and they're works of incredible scholarship. But again, we see that facility in those works where she moves between poetry, prose, chapbooks, drama, just
Right.
incredibly, and it reveals such a depth of reading and research that I'm in true awe of those particular works as well.
Right. And she seemed, I've just read her introduction to Gothic ideology, and she seemed very proud of her work with the chapbooks.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
she felt that she found pretty much every one of those.
Yeah,
You know, she was very proud of it too. And I think there's 30 of them scanned on that Marquette site right now. It's linked from her bio at Marquette. So I think that's an important resource to everyone who's studying the Gothic. You know?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I remember her telling me about the research trip she went on, traveling throughout Europe and visiting all these libraries and monasteries, I think, and gathering all these obscure chapbooks. So it was a major effort of primary research and unearthing this material that had been, you know, lost, unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that she was always very happy when she was able to get her hands dusty in an archive.
Right.
And that's something that she always communicated to me, that real passion for doing that archival research and finding things that nobody had touched for centuries.
Right. Right.
So, would you like me to do mine now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Well, I first met Diane, I'm going to put my glasses on, sorry, I need to read, at a joint meeting of the International Gothic Association at NASA in Halifax in 1999.
Yeah.
And at that point, I just passed my PhD viva, and it was one of my first major conferences and my first venture to a conference across the Atlantic. Diane, even at that point, took a lively interest in my work, and I enjoyed several conversations with her at that conference. It was a conference where, because I was just newly into the profession, I knew nobody, and her lively interest in me really encouraged me to keep going. She was engaged and supportive of my research, even at that early stage. And from that moment onwards, we ran into each other at many international conferences, both upon Romanticism and upon the Gothic. We shared an interest in the European dimensions of the Gothic during the Romantic period, and found ourselves always attending each other's papers and chatting over coffee afterwards. And those interactions gathered momentum as we found ourselves frequently thrown together at these conferences. In 2013, she graciously participated in one of two panels that I convened upon women's Gothic, as James said, at the Chawton House Conference upon Women Writers in Hampshire. And there she offered a wonderful paper upon the Gothic novel and its anti-Catholicism in the works of women, which was really superbly researched. And it formed part of a book called The Gothic Ideology that she published in 2014. In 2014, I also returned the favour by participating in a panel upon Anne Radcliffe of the NASA conference in Washington, D.C. And Diane had specially convened that panel, but she didn't herself present her own work. From the wonderful essay upon Anne Radcliffe's The Romance of a Forest, that she wrote for my co-edited collection, Anne Radcliffe, Romanticism and the Gothic, co-edited with Dale Townsend. Instead, she invited us, plus Edward Jacobs, to speak of our work from that collection, graciously yielding the floor to others. Not only this, but at my request, she allowed that panel to be affiliated with the International Gothic Association in order to gain an increasing promotion of that association within NASA. At that conference in 2014, Diane was as yet unaware that her cancer had returned. My conversations with her involved the discussions of research and of families, and she shared her pride in the achievements of both her son and her daughter, as I spoke of my 2 young daughters. As she later told me at the International Gothic Association conference in Vancouver in 2015, it was just after that conference in Asserwan in Washington, D.C., that she discovered that her cancer had returned. And even during that conference, she said to me, she suspected that. Mm. In spite of that returning illness, she continued to research and write pretty much as normal. She co-authored an essay upon Gothic chapbooks with Douglas H. Thompson for a further collection that I co-edited in 2015 upon Romantic Gothic. And she returned the excellent essay, as always, on time and with great efficiency. In spite of the severity of her illness by the summer of 2015, she still chose to come to the IGA conference in Vancouver, where she gave an excellent paper upon Charlotte Bronte's juvenilia and helped to administer the award of the Alan Lloyd Smith Memorial Prize for the best work upon Gothic. She was clearly very unwell at that point, but she still participated in the general conference atmosphere, attending both the reception and the banquet. And she spoke to me of her fears for her illness, but still at that point held out hope of treatment, since she wanted to spend more time with her children and wanted to see them both fully settled and happy in their lives. Even as a transatlantic colleague, I know how much her son and daughter meant to her. I contacted her when I discovered that her illness was terminal, and she wrote to me from her hospice, sending me a photo of her daughter's wedding dress as she was soon to be married, and telling me how happy she was that Emily was getting married. Professionally, Diane was a passionate advocate for Gothic studies and for Romanticism, and demonstrated both when well and poorly what an exemplary force and advocate she was for her chosen fields of specialism. She was a regular attendee at conferences. She always gave papers that spoke to the interrelationships between Romanticism and the Gothic. Mm-hmm. And within the final 5 years of her life, she produced 2 of her best works, I think, within her chosen fields of research that I'll speak to briefly. Now, the first one that I've got here, you see it,
yes,
it's Gothic Riffs. And the subtitle of that work is Secularizing the Uncanny in the European Imaginary, 1780 to 1820. That was published by Ohio State University Press in 2010. In examining, in particular, Gothic works from Britain, France, and Germany, this book uncovered many hitherto undiscussed works that are of immense significance to the history of the Gothic and Romanticism. Diane argued here that Romantic poets had borrowed quite extensively, and I quote, from the popular literature and performances of her day, and then chose to explore those popular literature and performances. And as I've already said during the discussion, her argument segued incredibly easily between drama, poetry, art, and fiction, demonstrating versatility and a true breadth of knowledge is really breathtaking. Yeah. Now, this book was jointly awarded the Alan Lloyd Smith Memorial Prize for the best book upon the Gothic that was produced between 2008 and 2010. Wow. And that was absolutely right. It is an immense work of scholarship to those who work within the fields of Romantic Gothic. But Diane was never one to rest upon her laurels. Already, even as that book was going into publication, she was undertaking research for her next work, The Gothic Ideology, which was published in 2014. This work, and I've got it here as well, it's incredible if you look at the breadth of it. Right. It was 360 pages in that press. It was published by the University of Wales Press in the series Gothic Literary Studies. And there she worked from a range of popular printed material and she emphatically argues that by and large, the major ideological agenda for the Gothic novel during the Romantic period was anti-Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
Now, although her argument was one with which I myself have taken issue in the works that I'd published before she published that one, because I found some work which I thought was more tolerant, she did acknowledge in this book that there were exceptions to this rule of anti-Catholicism.
Right.
But the true strength of her heavily researched argument came from that extensive examination of the more popular literary forms of the Gothic chapbook and reviews. In her chapter upon the spectre of theocracy, mysterious monks and priestcrafts, what an exciting title, Diane, for example, counted more than 100 titles that position the monk or the monk with daughter in tow as the main characters in a Gothic work, and asks, why this proliferation? Her answer, lying as it does in the ideology of anti-Catholicism, becomes ever harder to argue with as she amasses increasing amounts of evidence. That book, The Gothic Ideology, was also nominated for the Alan Lloyd Smith Memorial Prize in 2015. I personally will miss Diane's presence at conferences gratefully. Besides her interest and her fascinating scholarship, she was always a really genial character with the gift of a great anecdote. Her high standards in scholarship also extended to her standards when it came to the organisation of conferences. If she thought at conferences that something was amiss in the organisation, for example, she would make it known. And the gold standard question, whenever I was involved in any form of conference organisation, was, what would Diane say? Because she was one of these presences that had very high standards, and justifiably so. Now, those high standards are a credit to her. Her strength of scholarship and character are justifiably famous within the fields that we study, and they will be deeply missed by all of us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for that.
I do apologise for the glare from my glasses as well.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah. So, Beth, would you like to respond?
Well, one of the things your remarks made me think of is, just how incredibly widely read Diane was in all manner of Gothic works. And I remember her telling me that every time she taught a class, she did at least one new work, which is a pretty astounding principle that I can't claim to follow myself. And not only did she read these, but she remembered them. I recall one conference session that I attended where she had presented a paper, and then during the discussion period, somebody else was bringing up some obscure Gothic novel, and she piped in and corrected something, or the person couldn't think of a character's name or something, and she supplied all the characters' names and a plot summary, and I just thought it's incredible. I can't remember what I read last week, and had all of this, accessible.
What a mind.
And I think that one of the remarkable things about her was, that outward-facing help that she gave to others. And, when she travelled in France to research in the archives for the Gothic ideology and Gothic riffs, for example, she would go and stay with scholars in France, and she'd make their acquaintance and talk to them extensively. And, she acknowledged them all and, thanked them for their hospitality. And it was the same in Germany when she visited there to look at the Corvai archives and many other things. She would talk about that time very fondly, not just in terms of archival research, but for her interaction with other scholars as well, who were as equally passionate as she was in looking at obscure Gothic novels. Yeah,
and she loved to travel. She really enjoyed seeing new places, new people. She had that openness to experience and
yeah,
love
she
of
did.
life, I think.
Yes, in 2013, in the summer, I met her at 3 different conferences in the UK, which were roughly a month apart. Chawton House, then the Bars Romanticism one in Southampton, and then the International Gothic Association in Surrey. And by the time of the one in Surrey, she was still happy and still being, you know, as incisive and helpful as she could be to other scholars. And I just really admired her energy to do the course for that long without going home.
Yeah, another comment I thought of as you were speaking. Diane was first diagnosed with lung cancer in 2005, I think. Right. And then it was treated and she was declared cancer-free. But she told me that she felt like that experience had spurred her to increasing activity and accomplishment, that she thought, you know, her work on the 2 major books she published subsequent to that was in part a response to that brush with mortality. And once again, I think it's indicative of her and admirable that her response to adversity is more accomplishment, more productivity, rather than being discouraged or paralyzed or something like that.
Yes, it was hugely admirable. I think, you know, that came across when she was at the Vancouver conference in 2015, presenting upon Charlotte Brontë and speaking about that work in Charlotte Brontë that you were speaking of, Beth, and Deborah also speaks of. That sense that, you know, she was moving on to other things, but still going to panels and supporting other scholars and just keeping going for as long as she possibly could in her research. And I think at that point she was still hopeful that a second opinion might reveal, you know, some form of treatment that she could take. But, you know, she was keeping going despite clearly being very ill. And I admire that strength hugely.
Right.
That's great. When I was looking at the Gothic ideology and comments about anti-Catholicism, I mean, of course, there's a strong anti-Catholic tradition in England going back, you know, hundreds of years. But, you know, by the 19th century, and she, you know, kind of historicizes it, England's trying to move past that. And people in certain groups are, of course, resisting. I'm wondering if there's something else going on too, like some varieties of Protestantism tend to be iconoclastic. You know, they tend to eradicate the image and tend to be heavily conceptual. You know, so instead of you know, the humanity of Christ being depicted on a stained glass window, you'll have ideas like hypostatic union, you know, which has gone back quite some time, but that's what's emphasized. And then that leads to Kant and Hegel, okay? So if you're a novelist, I would think Catholicism would give you more to work with. You're working with the concrete and the specific. So you have something like an old enemy, you know, Catholicism, and that's easily recognizable, but plus they're very tangible forms. And and Catholicism more heavily imbues the material with spiritual significance, and some varieties of Protestantism, at least. So I think there's some of that going on too. And I mean, this even persists to the present. And you know, I hate to mention it, it's like a guilty pleasure, I guess. The Netflix series Penny Dreadful. I mean, working. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But it's working with characters from 19th century Gothic fiction and putting them all in the same world. You have Victor Frankenstein, you have his creature, you have Van Helsing, you have, you know, and on and on and on. You know, you have vampires, and they're all in one little world, and you have a werewolf now. but the lead female character, Ava Green, has a Catholic background. You know, so I think it's like the mechanics of fiction are more conducive to Catholicism, I think, and that might be part of what's going on. It's just an idea. I don't, I don't.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good idea, because one of the other big strains during the Romantic period, when you were saying about Protestantism, is the rise of millenarianism and prophecy through Joanna Southcott and various others. And I think that, the Gothic novel kind of digests that through these extreme versions of Catholicism, because what a lot of these novels seem to be saying is not about, the kind of religion per se, but it's more about the institutionalization of any religion, and, extreme forms of belief in religion, that lead people to making stupid mistakes. So I think it's quite interesting to think, because she asks this question herself in the Gothic ideology right at the beginning. She says, why so long after the Reformation does this strain of anti-Catholicism return?
Right.
And you could argue that, as she does in one particular chapter, that it is about the French Revolution and the post-revolutionary plays, which, depict monastic imprisonment, like Boutet de Montville's Les Victimes Cloîtrées, which is one which she uses. But conversely, there is that other sense that it moves on beyond the revolution well into the 19th century. And I think that her demonstration of it within chapbooks and the way that it's sustained well beyond the French Revolution, is an argument for it being not just about the revolution, but about other forms of extreme belief, which is being examined in the 19th century as well.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So do you want me to go on to Deborah's paper now?
Yeah, probably so.
Okay. So I will be reading Deborah Morse's paper. Of course, she wrote it in first person. So the me's and the I's in it will refer to her and not me. So so this is Deborah's contribution to our chat. In the spring of 2014, Diane Long-Hovler wrote to me to ask if I would like to be involved in the Blackwell companion to the Brontë she was editing. I had not signed up at the original call for proposals, but Diane had apparently read my Brontë posts on Victoria and had decided to ask me to take the place of a Brontë scholar who needed to lead the project. That was a very lucky day for me, because it began a 2-year collaboration with Diane, not only on the Blackwell volume, but also on a bicentenary collection of essays entitled Time, Space, and Place in Charlotte Brontë. By August of 2014, Diane had asked me to call her so that we could discuss co-editing these projects. In that first phone call between us, she told me that her cancer had returned and that she wanted to be certain of getting these projects in as planned, despite the resurgence of her illness. Diane felt a sense of urgency and responsibility to her contributors and editors. I had met Diane only once, 33 years before, when we had encountered each other on Atwater Beach in Shorewood, Wisconsin, because we both had 3-year-old rambunctious boys in tow. In the nearly 2 years that followed, Diane and I exchanged hundreds, perhaps thousands of emails, sometimes as many as 20 a day. I have not been able to erase them even yet. We were not always on the same schedule, and I think all of us here can understand that. And my other commitments to students, to governance at the college, and to other scholarly projects were understandably frustrating to someone who increasingly knew that her time was limited on this earth. In addition to our long conversations about the Brontes and about the essays in our collections, we came to discuss the vicissitudes of our lives on a daily basis. At the birth of her son's daughter, named Nora Diane after her grandmother, I sent a hooded baby towel that looked like a lobster. And Diane sent me a photograph of the beautiful baby wrapped in the towel, an image that made us both laugh. When Diane had surgery in the fall of 2014, I was one of the friends who gave her a plant and she wrote me later that it was a heather plant, so Brontean and beautiful. Diane was very grateful for the small, ordinary things people did for her in her extraordinarily unlucky situation. One of her last emails to me in May of 2016 remarked upon the beautiful hospice room in the woods in which she was staying with her daughter Emily. 5 days before she died, she wrote to me that she had had a lucky life. The work that we did together was intensely satisfying and intellectually rigorous. We had 34 essays to read for the Blackwell Companion, ranging from original readings of the individual Brontë novels to historical essays on Brontë context, ranging from slavery and the abolitionist movement to the Brontë Society and Parsonage Museum. For Diane's own creation, the bicentenary collection Time, Space, and Place in Charlotte Brontë, we had 16 more essays on fascinating topics, ranging from Lucy Morrison's essay on reverie and walking in Villette to Carol Davison's essay on death as the last home in Charlotte's works. We divided the responsibility for the essays and for the introductions, but still discussed problems and triumphs with each other's editing nearly every day. The 2 volumes include essays by many of the most important Brontë scholars writing today, including Beth Lau, who is part of this radio broadcast, who wrote on marriage and divorce in the novels for the Blackwell Companion, and on the place of Pamela and Jane Eyre for the Time, Space, and Place collection. Diane had a strong influence upon my own work during the period in which we co-edited these Brontë volumes, and she will continue to influence my research and writing on the Brontes henceforward. For the Blackwell, she asked me to write on legacy novels or Brontë afterings, texts that rewrite or adapt or revise the Brontes' lives and works. Thus began a rich period of reading for me, some of it profound and some a romp, such as The Secret Life of Charlotte Brontë, in which Brontë is a detective, great fun. I ended up writing on 4 novels that reimagined Emily Brontë: Mary Sinclair's modernist novel, The Three Sisters, Jane Urquhart's quirky and marvelous Changing Heaven, Stevie Davies' Four Dreamers and Emily, about a Brontë conference, among other things, and Denise Giardina's Emily's Ghost, a Gothic-infused political novel. I would never have done that work if Diane hadn't encouraged me. For the Time, Space, and Place volume on Charlotte, eventually published by Routledge after it bought Ashgate, I discussed an idea I had about Darwin's ideas influencing Jane Eyre more than had been recognized, particularly in relation to thinking about the struggle for existence among animals. Diane supported this idea, and that is the essay I wrote. We were both included in a volume focused upon Charlotte's juvenilia in relation to the later works that Judith Pike and Lucy Morrison co-edited, and again, Diane was supportive of my ideas on homoerotic confession in The Professor. Diane's own work on the Brontes is wonderful. At her request, I first read the Gothic Influences essay, wittily titled The Not So New Gothic, Charlotte Bronte's Juvenilia and the Gothic Tradition, that is included in the Juvenilia collection just mentioned. In this essay, Diane explores the heretofore underemphasized influence of the Gothic novel on Charlotte's works, discovering that the Juvenilia are steeped in the tropes of what she terms down-market garish works. For the bicentenary Time, Space, and Place collection, Diane wrote another tour de force essay, this time on Charlotte's anxious imagination as it manifested itself artistically in novelistic tableaux vivants very much influenced by Charlotte's immersion in the theater. Diane's Blackwell essay is a sustained interpretation that only she had the experience to write, in which she claims that the Gothic aesthetic and its genre conventions pervaded the writings of the Brontë sisters from their very earliest readings and writings as adolescents to their last pieces of fiction. This autumn, in a bicentenary issue of Victorian's Journal of Literature and Culture dedicated to Diane, my associate editor Amber Poilot and I gave pride of place to Diane's compelling essay on Charlotte's oeuvre as fantasy writing. In this last work on the Brontes, Diane explores the tension between the personal and the historical that is so intriguing and powerful in the works of Charlotte Brontë. I can only say, reader, we miss her. Okay, that was Deborah's paper, and that was wonderful. If you're listening, Deborah, thank you, and I hope you feel better soon. Would you all like to comment on it?
Well, just to say, that I think that I heard a version of the paper upon Charlotte Bronte's juvenilia at a conference in 2015. I thought that it was really tremendous, significant work, because, to date, there hasn't been enough exploration of the juvenilia, and, the way in which she detects earlier Gothic tropes is just fantastic, and it makes complete sense to me as well.
That's good. And Beth, you contributed to some of this.
Right, yes. So I was involved as a contributor in those 2 Brontë volumes. Maybe I'll just mention too that I was also invited to contribute to the juvenilia volume. And initially I said I'd like to, and then I eventually withdrew because I said I had too many other things to do. But once again, it's typical of Diane that she had even more things to do, and she accepted that invitation. Wrote essays for everything, in addition to editing the collections.
Right. Yes, but there is one other essay that is worth mentioning, which is my colleague Andrew Smith edited the Cambridge Companion to Frankenstein, which came out this year. And Diane contributed an essay on that, which she must have written, between 2014 and 2015. And again, she submitted on time, and it was really great. It was on dramatic adaptations of Frankenstein.
Wow.
So the Cambridge Companion to Frankenstein also contains a dedication to her, because by the time it came into print, she had passed away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recall something else she told me once, that for her, the hardest part of the research process was reading. But she said once she started writing, the works practically wrote themselves. And I remember feeling a great deal of envy.
Me too.
We all had that facility.
Yes.
I hear that.
Yeah. I always find it incredibly difficult to start an essay. Once it starts, it's okay, but there's that sense of, actually beginning it. And her work shows none of that anxiety at all.
Right. As I say, she seemed to not know the meaning of writer's block. It just...
No.
Yeah, her work is seamless. When you read it, her writing is wonderful. It's like she's just talking to you. And for literary scholarship, that's not always the case. But her work is actually a pleasure to read as well. It works.
Yeah, and I love the way that she often starts. She starts both Gothic riffs and the Gothic ideology with analysing an image. Right. And she seems very adept as well in visual analysis as well as literary analysis, and she begins to extrapolate from that image, and it's just a great way to begin those books.
That's great. Well, I have one question for both of y'all. How would you describe Diane's contribution to dark romanticism, or to the intersections of the Gothic and the Romantic?
Well, Angela's
probably... question.
I would just say, obviously, she's a major figure. She's considered one of the experts in that area.
I mean, I would say, just to follow on from Beth, much the same, in that her contribution is immense. And because the Gothic ideology was only published fairly recently, I think that, there's still not enough sense of just how immense her contribution is. But, she, like I say, she's able to move with great facility between genres, and also is an incredibly strong advocate for the interrelationship between Romanticism and the Gothic. And She has done an immense amount of work with that particular field, and she'll be sorely missed as a collaborator and as, you know, a fellow traveller for me.
Right. Yeah. I had another question too. She makes reference to victim feminism as well, which sounds like a pejorative term, but she said when she was reading that in a description of it, that's when it kind of clicked for her. That's what women writers were doing. They were establishing during this period, they were establishing a place, a position, a stance by which they could push back, I thought that was very interesting. How would you describe like the progression of that idea in her work? If that's very easy to define.
Well, I think it's one of these ideas that I remember, it comes from Gothic feminism. Right. And I remember it provoked a big debate at the time. I remember one review of her book picking up on that and taking issue with it, but also the way in which she actually staunchly defended herself in reviewing somebody else's book for that idea. Right. And I think it's something that as feminists we don't particularly like to think of because we find it uncomfortable. But at the same time, she has a very strong argument to make about the victim feminism of the Gothic heroine in the 1790s and 1800s. So I do think that it is a defensible argument when we actually examine the works that she was examining. Right,
yeah, because it's an expression of agency too. I think that's part of her argument. So it's not passive victimization.
Yes, it's in part with Michel Massey's In the Name of Love, Women, Masochism in the Gothic, that sense of a body of scholarship dealing with these novels that clearly make us feel uncomfortable because it's about being a victim, but that being quite a conscious decision, a performance in some ways within those texts as well.
Right.
And I will
go ahead.
say that it's typical of Diane's work that she was never afraid to be controversial, to challenge people's accepted notions, whether, I think when she started out, it was with male scholars and poets and challenging a lot of the received ideas about the male romantic poets, but then also with women writers and feminism as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I admire her courage hugely in doing that. Yeah.
And, as uncomfortable as those works make us feel, we keep reading them. 50 Shades of Grey. Come on. Which is like the worst possible expression of it, probably. Yeah. But it's over 100 million books worldwide. And recently, So we're not past this. This is still a current topic. This isn't like in a 19th century little pigeonhole.
Right.
This is still ongoing. We're still consuming this material.
Yes, well, I haven't read any of them and I haven't watched the film, so I can't comment.
I watched the film and I read parodies.
Yeah, but it is the thing that, in the 1770s, Anna Letitia Aiken wrote with her brother an essay called On the Pleasure Derived from Objects of Terror. And it is about the pleasure that we get when we spectate or read tales of terror. And I think that they constantly use the pronoun we, and there is that sense that this is a universal thing that persists to this day, that we actually gain pleasure from seeing somebody else's pain.
Yeah, especially if we empathize with the character, because then it kind of becomes our own.
Yes, absolutely.
It's a variety of the sublime.
Yes,
because there's some aesthetic distance there, and yet, it's an uncomfortable feeling at times. So, do y'all have any closing comments?
I don't know that I have much more to add.
Yeah, you both said quite a bit. It's been
Yeah.
wonderful.
It did strike me how all three of our statements ended with a sentence to the effect of how much Diane will be missed by all of us personally and in the profession at large. And I think that's a major statement.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is first and foremost absolutely about her scholarship, but also about that genial company that she always provided, and the conversations. And I really will miss that at conferences.
Yeah.
She will be greatly missed.
Yes. Yeah.
But the other side is all the work that she's left us. And as you say, Angela, it's much of it still quite recent and will go on to inform our understanding and discussions about Romanticism and the Gothic.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm working on a volume, a few things right now. One of them is Rock and Romanticism. It's about the intersections of rock and roll and English Romanticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I have two separate versions of it. One is classic rock and one is post-punk and Gothic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to have to go into dark Romanticism and the relationships between Romanticism and the Gothic and how that might work itself out in like goth music. From the 90s. So I plan on drawing heavily from Diane's work there.
Yes.
and some of our contributors are writing about female artists too, like Chrissy Hind and the Pretenders. And there are horrible things described in their songs. Some of it is Gothic. You know, I don't know if she was deliberately writing in that mode, but it comes across that way. So I'm looking forward to delving more deeply into her works too.
Yes. Well, there's so much to be discovered, particularly in the ones that I looked at, the big works, and it's incredible that these were produced within the last 5 years.
Right.
Closely together, they're just immense and really significant works.
Yeah, and up to the last minute too. So and I don't know if the chat is going to show up in the recording, but I did post a link to the archive on Marquette University's website for the Gothic chapbooks. And that's a wonderful resource. I think there's about 30 up right now, and they're either scanned or transcribed. And they're wonderful, short, melodramatic, gory Gothic works. Everything you can hope for. They are penny dreadfuls. And so I really would encourage anyone, interested in that area to visit that website. Just go to Marquette University, find Diane's page, and it's still up. And then there'll be a link to it there. So that's a resource that I have a feeling will continue to grow. I'm sure they'll keep putting more and more up, and I think we should use it. It looks like a wonderful opportunity for us all.
Yes.
All right, shall I wrap it up, or?
Yeah, I had just one last shout out for, the International Gothic Association Conference, which will be in Cholula, Mexico, in July. There'll also be a sort of memorial dedicated to her with some of her graduate students speaking alongside Anne Williams and other major figures in Gothic Romanticism as well.
That's wonderful.
We'll post news of that as well.
Yeah, I was very unfortunate to miss the Vancouver conference. I'd gone to MLA in Vancouver that year, and that tapped me out. So, I hope I can make this next one.
Great.
I have friends who attend that, and
you'll be most welcome.
The Vancouver conference.
Yay.
So, okay, well, this concludes our chat about the work of Diane Hovler of Marquette University. I'd like to thank Beth Lau and Angela Wright and Deborah Morse for their contributions. And we hope to have this chat archived on Romantic Circles Reviews and Receptions soon. A link will be up on my personal website too, jamesrovira.com. And it'll be available for future reference. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for paying tribute to this wonderful scholar.
And thank you, Jim, for organizing this.
Oh, I was grateful to be asked. Romantic Circles asked me the summer after she passed away, so that was my first idea.
Great. And from me too, thank you. It's been a pleasure to participate.
Yeah, I think I got the best possible participants. So thank you all for coming.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.